If the Big Ten and the SEC do continue on this march, as you just kind of depicted, they've already basically, aside from Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and a possible one or two other schools, they've reached the crescendo of the per school payout. Then you start to delve with teams that are going to going to decrease the per school payout. So I would question their motives at that point in regards to, yes, are we trying to make sound financial decisions and do what's best for our member schools and have a strong, dominant football conference? They've both reached that level, that's for sure. Or are we looking to just consume the sport? Just consume the sport and wind up with 32 teams, and it's going to lower the value of the average across the board if you suck up all those Big 12 and ACC schools. But we're just going to come to a landing spot. I think at some point somebody drew a map that took a line from Seattle to about Columbia, South Carolina, basically said, I guess, yeah, one half would, or actually, I guess it would go the other way, wouldn't it? It would go from Los Angeles to Boston, possibly. Who knows what the
Well,
configuration in terms of, the crisscross of half the
those are the
nation is
two
going to be the Big
diagonals.
Ten,
Yeah.
and yes, and then the other half turns out to be the SEC and the Big Ten, and I don't want to see that be the result of all this, and I would again highly question the motives of. But as I posted today, I produced a quick short where I just basically said, hey, people are blaming Fox and ESPN for the demise of college football. Don't blame them. They run businesses. Don't even blame Greg Sankey and Kevin Warren and now Tony Petiti. They are hired. It is their role to build their conference into the best brand and the wealthiest commodity they can. Blame going back decades. They're too weak to do anything about it now, but blame the NCAA for not foreseeing what money and TV revenue was doing to this sport. And that's a positive. It should have been worked in a positive way, but the sport should have been brought together. The conferences should have been brought together to do what's best for the sport, and everybody could still have plenty of money and power and territory to go around and have the entire sport be healthy.
One thing we have to say, and your points are really well made and well taken. I mean, the NCAA really fundamentally, like, it's supposed to be the leadership body, and it's not providing any leadership at all. So to that extent, you're absolutely spot on. But I do think we have to, just take one step above, like, the NCAA administrative level, and remember that the NCAA exists, for its members. Like, the NCAA serves at the pleasure of the member institutions that are part of it. And so I think if we're going to really drill deeper and go to the absolute center of all of this, I mean, the NCAA is dropping the ball. Again, you're absolutely right. But there is a deeper layer to this, and that is that if the school presidents and chancellors wanted the NCAA to do different things and to be a very different kind of leadership body, they could do that. Like, they could vote, and they could insist that the NCAA have a different mission, a different orientation. I bring this up for a number of reasons, but chiefly, we heard Monday evening, John Urand of Sports Business Journal, he reported that the Pac-12 presidents voted down what Urand said in his article was a, quote, significant deal last year. Now, that word significant doesn't really mean much of anything until we get a dollar figure in terms of, annual revenue per year. I'm really interested in learning what the dollar figure was. But even without having the dollar figure there, it does bring up that the Pac-12 president shot down Larry Scott's Pac-16 plan with Texas and Oklahoma and Texas Tech and Oklahoma State in 2011. So if we don't know this, but if the dollar per year figure for the Pac-12, which the Pac-12 presidents rejected last year, was at or near the 31.7 million that Brett Yormark delivered to the Big 12, then that would mean that the presidents were objectively more centrally responsible than George Kliavkoff for the death of the Pac-12. Now, again, we don't know the number, but if the number was in the ballpark of 31.7, then that would mark a second time in 12 years that the Pac-12 presidents shot down a deal which, if passed, would have been enormously beneficial to the Pac-12 solely in terms of revenue for member schools. I mean, a Pac-16 with Texas and Oklahoma joining the Pac-12 would have been a revenue gusher for the Pac-12. It would have been, really impressive. It would have fortified the conference without question, would have drastically improved its TV value. We would not be here mourning the death of the Pac-12 if that hadn't happened. And so if this deal had numbers comparable to the Big 12, again, we don't know, but hopefully that's going to be unearthed pretty soon, later this week, then that would mean the Pac-12 presidents again restrained their commissioner, prevented their commissioner from acting. And that would really underscore the point that the presidents and chancellors, not just, I use the Pac-12 as a representative example, but then extending that to, hey, these chancellors and presidents, they can tell the NCAA what they want. And whatever they're telling the NCAA, it's not leading toward leadership. It's not leading toward good governance. It's not leading toward the proper focus. They can shift this orientation if they want, but somehow, for some strange reason, not enough of them, if any of them, seem interested in that. And it really just projects the image of a bunch of academics with their heads stuck in the sand, not having a clue how the real world operates, not having a clue how, what's really motivating people on the ground making their decisions. If they want the NCAA to be different, they can do that, but they're not. And we really need that kind of moment for lots of reasons, Mark, and for everyone watching here in the Voice of College Football. But one of the biggest things is, obviously this is a football show, but it's time to divorce football from all the other sports. Like it is just so nakedly obvious now. Not that it wasn't nakedly obvious before, but like now it's just like being bashed right between the eyes repeatedly. Like no one can claim to be ignorant of this point now. And if we have Stanford volleyball players traveling to Blacksburg, Virginia, and other ACC sites for regular competitions, and we have Washington Husky fans going to Piscataway, New Jersey, for Big Ten, swimming meets, or track and field competitions. Come on, what are we doing here? And those athletes in Pac-12 locations, they signed up for an experience where they could stay in their home region with their families, with their relatives. They're not making a money play. They want to just play softball. They want to play volleyball. They want to swim in their home regions. They did not sign up for this. And we have to find a way to turn all of this around, because this is affecting thousands of young people all across the country. We got out of the pandemic. We talked a whole lot about the mental health of young people being able to get outside, exercise, to not have their lives be totally brought to a halt. Look, do we care about young people or not? Do we care about all these thousands of human beings, 18 to 21 years old, or not? Like it is time to get serious about these kinds of things and really make that separation between the revenue sports and the non-revenue sports. And are saner heads going to prevail? Can we unwind these provisions in which Olympic sport athletes are being asked to now fly across the country like professionals? And, maybe a few of them will get NIL endorsements, but not most of them. And yet we're going to treat them like NBA players, basically. Like this is just a clown car, and there's no leadership in place because the college presidents and chancellors just have their heads stuck up their behinds.
It's a great point, man. And I completely agree. In the real world, in a Pollyanna world, I would love it to where the universities and all the sports programs could exist in the same conference and then compete as rivals against their rival schools and all of that. But we've just reached a point, as you very eloquently um, displayed there and explained, that we've just reached the point of no return when it comes to that. So for the softball player at Arizona State, yes, there's no reason to be traveling to West Virginia and Iowa and other locations. Now, play in your area, and you described it much better than I am in regards to, yes, for family and friends that want to attend the games, both home and away. Uh, sure, there's room to make one massive trip, let's say each season, for a softball team in particular, especially those teams in the North, to have a Florida swing or a Carolinas swing or a California swing early in the season, and get that experience in, but not make it a full-time job where you're traveling thousands of miles on a regular basis for 4 months. That's ridiculous. The point about the NCAA, from my standpoint, is that what I was calling upon the NCAA is where I just feel we've passed the point of its effectiveness, and I think they failed, in the last few decades, and now they've been rendered useless. And for some reason, as you outlined, they were called upon to be a leadership um, organization. And what they've been this entire time of modern athletics, and football in particular, has been a disciplinary committee. Basically, that's what they've been. They have followed leads, made investigations, and doled out discipline. That's been their whole function, or 90 some percent of it.
Yeah, and we're talking, and the NCAA is focused on like Jim Harbaugh and hamburgers at Michigan, and are you giving your athletes too many meals, or like, what are we doing? Like, is this what you want to spend your life doing as an administrator or as a compliance officer within the NCAA superstructure? Like, this is what's absorbing man hours and billable time. It's just like, just lost focus on what really matters here. And this should be about creating opportunities and creating, good, healthy life situations. It shouldn't be like this nickel and dime focus on, well, are you using the proper things in the proper way? Like, are you using the right salad fork? Basically, it's all about manners, norms, and etiquette, as opposed to just, hey, are you, as an athlete, are you in position to succeed? What more can we do for you? How can we empower you? How can we put you in the best position to thrive as a young person? It's all out of whack. So just in the bigger picture, as we look at realignment, like, we're considering all these wacky scenarios, like Oregon State and Washington State to the AAC as a possibility. And one of the things we need to be looking at is, with this Mountain West Pac-4 merger, I mean, if the ACC is looking at Stanford and Cal, that's really bad news for the Mountain West. Like, that point needs to be affirmed, because Stanford probably a couple weeks ago was thinking, maybe the Big Ten will want us. Maybe the Big Ten will reach out to us. Now you have the ACC in play. And what that does is that Stanford is now thinking about the Big Ten and the ACC as possibilities, such that Stanford's probably going to now be disappointed if it doesn't land at least one of the two spots. So that really takes the Mountain West lower, in my estimation, as an ultimate desirable outcome for Stanford. I think that, Stanford going independent in football is something that Stanford could realistically do. I came up with a Stanford independent schedule. You play some service academies, you play some Mountain West schools, like you'll definitely play San Jose State to have a low, short distance commute. You'll play maybe one team in the state of Texas to establish that regional connection. And you play the Big Ten teams, as an independent. You'll play the Big Ten teams that are in the West. You'll be able to play USC, UCLA, keep those California rivalries going. And then you'll play the service academies, like Navy. Stanford is a pretty natural fit. You can do that home and home every year, like the way Navy plays Notre Dame. Stanford can basically do its own version, West Coast style, of what Notre Dame has been doing as an independent. That seems pretty reasonable. But then when you get into all the other sports, it's hard to think that Stanford's going to accept a Mountain West membership. I mean, you think about Stanford women's basketball in particular, that's a world-class, nationally relevant sports program. That program is not going to want to be in the Mountain West. It's going to want to be in the Big Ten or the ACC. So I think this ACC Stanford Cal exploration has a lot of different meanings, but I think one of them is that it undercuts the idea that the Mountain West is going to be able to merge with all four of the Pac-4 schools. Might just be Oregon State and Washington State at most. Then the Mountain West has to consider whether it wants to keep some of its bottom feeders. I'm thinking Hawaii. Like, I think Hawaii is in real danger of being left out of the Mountain West in football. Will be replaced by either SMU or Tulane. Schools that the Pac-12 talked to SMU. So maybe the Mountain West might think about bringing the Ponies aboard for the new conference with Washington State and Oregon State to try and bump up the television value a little bit. So I think it's looking grim for the Mountain West in terms of the realignment chessboard, but it just underscores the point that all of this is being done for money. The welfare of the student athlete, especially in the non-football sports, it's not really being considered at all.
My initial reaction to Stanford, even though I brought it up last week and said, what about Stanford going independent? My initial response when you brought it up again this week, Matt, was, do they get lost in the sea of everyone else being in conferences and Notre Dame? They're just a different deal, a different brand, and people keep track of them and they're playing significant games. Do they just kick with no identity, with nothing else to as a foundation for their schedule, for their what network they're on? So I quickly went to BYU because that would be a comparable comparison in regards to BYU just being out on an island, piecing together a football schedule. And I wasn't so concerned because I've always made this evaluation, Matt, as I have rated and ranked schedules. Typically, I didn't do it this past off season, but typically every off season I will rank the schedules 1 through 65 in the Power Five. And I always make this comment about BYU because I've included them in the rundown. They always have the oddest, strangest schedule of anyone because they lock in. They basically play a high-end Pac-12 schedule the first month, and then they're able to find a few other like grade A type opponents a few other times, and then they're playing even the likes of Wagner and schools like that, just trying to piece together a schedule when everybody else is in their silos of playing conference schedules. But I was more interested in this comparison between BYU and Stanford to see what networks BYU played on last season, their last year as an independent. And the outcome is better than I remembered. They played on ESPNU against South Florida. They had an ESPN game against Baylor. Then they played on Fox against Oregon. They played on ESPN2 against Wyoming. ESPN against Utah State. That was on a Thursday. As you might imagine, a Utah State BYU game would be on ESPN. They had the Notre Dame game, of course, on NBC. They played Arkansas on ESPN, a 3:30 game. ESPNU for Liberty, ESPN2 for East Carolina, and FS2 for Boise State. And then Utah Tech. There's another one of those type games that they have to kind of cobble together and trying to put the schedule together. That was on ESPN3, and then they finished up against Stanford on FS1. So actually, the results of the television landing spots for BYU was better than I remembered.
Yeah, and I think Stanford could do certainly as well, if not better, than what BYU has done. But it's going to be interesting to see how Stanford, if Stanford looks for a split independent football and then joining a conference in the other sports, or if it feels the need to have to join another Power 5 conference in football. So, lots of realignment stuff. There's going to continue to be more rumors, more exploratory talks.